Cobra Kiss? The Elysian Forbidden Market was silent for a second of intense tension. Old, young, men, women, and animals, all of them froze for an instant that marked history in the life of the place. A visitor had arrived. The great merchant of the north was responsible for numerous turbulent deals. He was a man of all crimes who liked to be called the Master of Darkness, but he was known to all as the Prince. The mysterious character was there to meet a local gem, a market extravaganza named Brida. Wind, dust, and sand had crossed rivers, mountains, and deserts, and brought to the ears of the prince stories of the captivating Brida. He had heard such things. So deep had the image of the wild woman sunk into his mind that he had decided to cross the entire country, not only for the purpose of witnessing her charm, but also with the firm conviction that she would become his wife. The evil tongues of the market said that Brida's veins did not run blood, but poison. The myth began the very day of her birth, since her mother had died at the time of giving birth, and her entire family blamed the baby. Things had not improved for the little girl over the years, since, when she was only 2, her father had tried to drown her. The little girl had saved herself by biting her father and running away. The man died on the spot for reasons no one ever knew. A family found her wandering alone in the mountains and decided to take her in. They were only an elderly couple and their blind grandson, who were dedicated to the breeding of snakes and the sale of cobras and their derivatives in the Forbidden Market. They baptized her Brida and gave her the best home they could. The couple who welcomed Brida were kind-hearted, just like their grandson, and another life could have been possible for the girl if they had not been so old and the child had not been so sick. It is true that they taught her everything they knew about cobra breeding, extracting venom, where to sell it, and everything needed for the girl to one day take over the business. But they couldn't offer her much more. The death of the couple's grandson, when Brida was barely 7 years old, distanced the couple even more from reality and drew them closer to each other. The little boy was also the only significant human connection she had to the world. The tragedies did not end there. The old woman died of grief the following year, and the man survived only 4 more winters, allowing the little girl to begin to become a woman and gain the tools to get ahead on her own. Many adult and dangerous men tried to take over little Brida's business. 3 men dared to challenge the girl with fire in her eyes and poison in her blood. They all died from poisoning. No one could ever prove that she was responsible for the fatalities, but as a general rule, people considered it too coincidental, and no one tried again. Despite the prince's very different intentions, people highly doubted that Brida would agree to the option he would present her. What would happen when the two met for the first time had become a topic of conversation to such an extent that some even placed bets. The most pessimistic believed that without even saying a word, Brida would command her cobras to pounce on the prince and kill him on the spot. The dramatic ones thought that Brida would conquer him, and after getting married on their wedding night, she would poison the glass of wine with which they would toast. The most optimistic were convinced that Brida would accept the proposal, marry him, take over his businesses, and then kill him. When the prince entered the Forbidden Market, all the merchants and customers began to follow him. The vision was truly spectacular. He was a tall man, taller than most, his muscles showing well marked under his open waistcoat and visible beneath his light black cloth pants. On his back hung a cloak of the same color that floated in the wind. He was a specimen that left both men and women breathless, sometimes for different reasons and sometimes for the same. By the time he entered the stall lane where Brida had hers, a veritable crowd of onlookers followed him, along with his own men clad from head to toe in black and carrying sabers at their waists. After crossing great distances, he finally stood in front of the famous woman. By the time the prince stood in front of Brida, she was turned around, talking to her cobras. The first thing the man noticed were her long legs, which culminated in a narrow waist. Glossy, well-groomed chestnut brown hair swept up into an elegant bun. The hundreds of pairs of eyes on her made Brida realize something was happening, and she turned to see what it was. As she turned, Brida revealed her exotic face to the prince, with huge eyes seemingly ablaze. At that precise moment, everyone waited in anticipation, and the Forbidden Market fell into deep silence, broken only by the disturbing hissing of the cobras, who sensed that their mistress was being threatened and rose defensively. Those who expected an automatic death for the prince lost their money and illusions. Brida did nothing at first. She stood facing the monumental man, who looked at her defiantly. She had not been oblivious to the speculation that surrounded the meeting. He was not the first to have sought her, since many had passed through there before, and none had achieved their goal. In truth, Brida was even curious about who it was that dared to claim her now. What she saw did not leave her unmoved. The man had an icy gaze, and acid seemed to run through his veins beneath his ivory skin. His dishevelled blonde curls gave him an unexpectedly childish air, which clashed with everything else that emanated from his figure. An animalistic connection emerged between them. All their lives they had looked for someone like the one in front of them at that precise moment. The other side of the same coin, beaten and used many times, but which remained unshakable. A unique understanding and subliminal communication that no one else could share. Little by little, their bodies moved closer under the watchful eyes of the entire market. Lost in Brida's eyes, and sensing her movement toward him, the prince closed the remaining distance. He took her by the waist and moved his face closer to kiss her. A muffled moan escaped from the mouths of everyone present. If the air seemed frozen before, now you couldn't even hear the snakes. His attempt to kiss her was a surprise to everyone, but what followed was beyond even the most creative minds. At the key moment when the prince tried to bring his lips closer to Brida's, she made a sinuous movement with her body, which seemed to imitate the way her own cobras moved, and immediately she moved away from him and turned her back. During the second that followed, a million thoughts crossed the minds of those present. Had the prince dared to kiss the most powerful and dangerous woman in the region? Had Brida dishonored him and aroused the desire for revenge in the toughest and most feared man in the north? Everyone held their breath expectantly. What happened next could be the start of a catastrophe. However, approaching the table in her stall, Brida grabbed 2 glasses and the bottle of wine she used to entice her clients. She poured the red liquid into both containers, then handed one to the prince, who accepted it. No one could know what was going through the heads of those two. The truce may have been because they saw an equal in each other, as broken and battered as themselves. Possibly they had grown tired of fighting the world and needed a break. Perhaps they both wanted to see who would win the final battle, poison and fire, or ice and acid. But in that moment, through their exchange of glances, both understood that time would decide the outcome. Now there was nothing to do but toast and drink.